Hello again, hope everyone's doing well. Today's video is going to be about Nick Daicos and specifically how I think his rookie cards are extremely overvalued at the time being. I have 3 talking points I want to go through in this video, but before I do that, I'm going to do my normal disclaimer, which is if you're a pure collector and you don't care if a price goes up, down, sideways, then this video doesn't really apply to you. What I will say is that I think there's only an extremely small percentage of people who are pure collectors that don't care about price at all. I think it's extremely natural to care if the price of your investment or even the price of your collection goes down that 20, 30 or 50%. It's just a natural thing to care about losing money. But with that disclaimer out of the way, I'm going to get into my point number 1, and that is it's extremely hard to pick and it's extremely unlikely that a young player is going to become an all-time great or a high-end Hall of Famer. If you look back the last 20 years of drafts, there's probably only about 10 to 20 players that have this kind of status. And if you assume that about 60 players are picked each draft, that means that a pool of 1,200 and 10 to 20 players are only about 1 to 2% of this pool. So you've got a 1 in 50 or a 1 in 100 chance to pick the next all-time great. But obviously in this situation, you've got a bit of a leg up because you know that Nick Daicos is a class player. He's just had one of the best rookie seasons of all time. But what I'm going to do is bring in a couple comparisons, a few cautionary tales from the past to show that just because someone has an awesome first season or they're a highly touted draft pick doesn't mean they're going to reach this all-time great status. So the first comparison I want to make is Reece Palmer. If you've followed the AFL for a while, you probably know who Reece Palmer is. He was picked up in the 2007 draft for Fremantle, and in 2008 he had one of the best rookie years of all time. Now it's pretty forgotten now and not talked about because he didn't end up doing anything else with his career. In fact, his first season was his best year in the AFL. I think he stayed in the system for maybe about 10 more years. But that first season was his best. He had 23 touches on average a game, and he had 7 Brownlow votes that season. You compare this to Nick Daicos in the 2022 season. Nick Daicos had 25 touches and 11 Brownlow votes. So yes, Nick Daicos did have a slightly better season, but not by much. And you can see Reece Palmer, he won all the plaudits in that first year. He won Rising Star, he won the AFL Players Association vote for the best first year player, but that ended up being his best season. So I don't think Nick Daicos is necessarily going to do this, but it is a cautionary tale. Now, where I think Nick Daicos might slot in is this next category of players who are extremely highly touted and ended up having very, very good careers, but not good enough to keep their footy prices high in the long term. So I've got a few names on the list which fit this category, I think. First of all, Bryce Gibbs. Bryce Gibbs was a crazy can't miss prospect when he came to the league. Like he'd been playing state footy in SA, in the state leagues, since he was 16. People saw him as the definite next big thing. He went at number 1 in the draft, and don't get me wrong, he'd had a few very good seasons at Carlton. He ended up playing about 270 games between Carlton and Adelaide, but he never even made an All-Australian. And his card prices now, there's nothing really to speak of there. Next is Mark Murphy, another number 1 pick, and these players are in big markets because I know Nick Daicos is helped by being in that big market of Collingwood, but these two played for Carlton, and Mark Murphy was nearly just as highly touted as Gibbs. He only made 1 All-Australian, and he played the 300 games, which is a huge achievement, but even making the 1 All-Australian and playing 300 games, his card prices really aren't there, and he's not seen as a legend of the game. Next, Brett Delidio, a big Richmond star in the late 2000s and the early to mid 2010s. He played 275 games. He did move to GWS at the end of his career, but he played most of his footy at Richmond. He made All-Australian twice, and he was picked number 1 as well, seen as this can't miss prospect. And he did have a very good career. But now you can pick up his draft pick signature for probably under $100. So despite having a career that's better than the vast majority of AFL players, he has kind of fallen into the pack as well, and his prices don't really stack up at the moment. A couple more recent quick ones, we've got Yayo O'Meara. He was another pick 1 who has carved out a decent career, but he's definitely not what he was promised to be back in the day. Dyson Appel had an amazing breakout first season and now is a great clubman, but not seen on that level competition wide. And a more recent one is probably Andrew McGrath. He was picked number 1 and he hasn't put a foot wrong. Like, he's played amazing footy for Essendon, yet he hasn't done enough to increase his footy card value, and he hasn't done enough to engrave himself as one of the top players in the game. So that's point number 1, that Nick Daicos probably won't become an elite superstar, all-time great of the game. The odds are stacked against him no matter how good his first season was. But playing devil's advocate, because it's very possible he does do this as well, what if it does work out? What if he becomes someone like a Judd, Joel Selwood, Luke Hodge, that kind of player? What happens then? And that brings me into point 2, which is, even if it goes right, it still goes wrong. And the comparison for this one, I think, is Chris Judd. Chris Judd is a top 3 or 4 player of the modern era, and he could be a top 10 player of all time, depending how you look at it. If you look at his rarest DPS, draft pick signature, that one's from 2002, and it's numbered out to 225. This signature goes for $300. So I just want to put that in perspective. Judd, who's one of the greatest players of all time, he's the best. He only has 2 rookie cards instead of Daicos' 9. They're both signatures. This one is the best one, numbered out at 225, and it sells for $300. Now, Nick Daicos, like I said, he has 9 rookie cards for the moment. It could even increase, who knows with Select. But Daicos' 3rd best DPS, numbered out of 170, which is pretty close to the Judd. And keep in mind that it's his 3rd best versus Judd's best, is selling for about $600, which is double Judd's. So even if Daicos becomes like a player like Judd, there is no way that these prices can sustain themselves. Like, the only way that these prices can sustain themselves if he becomes the best player of all time. That's literally what's priced into these cards at the moment, which is ridiculous. It leaves absolutely no leeway for any foot wrong. Like, he'd have to win the Brownlow for the next couple years just for his prices to stay at this level. And the last comparison I want to make in this section is Scott Pendlebury, someone I see as the best Collingwood player of the last 20 years. You could argue someone like Swan or Buckley at the end of his career, but I'd say Pendlebury. He only has 1 signature card, 1 signature rookie card. It's numbered out of 275 and it sells for $350. Now, this is a man that's done almost everything you can in the career other than win a Brownlow. He's still captain, he's still playing at a high level, and yet his best signature is selling for less than Daicos' 3rd best. So personally, I think anyone who is buying Daicos at these prices are going to get crushed in the future. But I don't think it's necessarily going to be even. And that's my point number 3. I said in my weekly video last week that the copper price is the one that stood out the most to me, and that's still the case. I get the human element where if people just want his card, they're probably going to get the cheapest one because they want to spend the least amount of money to get Daicos' signature card, which I completely understand. But from an investment point of view, that card's out of 170 and it's his 3rd best. The platinum's out of 40 and it's his best. The platinum should be about 5 to 6 times the price of the copper. At the moment, it's about 3 times the price. So for me, who already thinks the platinum is overvalued, that means that the copper is vastly overvalued in my estimation. And I think this one is going to fall the most. I think the gold is probably the most reasonably priced of them all because it's just above the copper at the moment. And I think the platinum could stay high because the people who are buying them already have money. So they probably won't want to sell for a loss within the near future. So those platinums may be artificially inflated for a few years to come, but over time, I really do think they're going to fall as well. And overall, I think you're definitely looking at 50+% losses in the 2 to 5 years following this release. So I don't want to get too negative in this video. I know it is a negative video, but I feel like someone had to say it. Someone had to point out that these prices are extremely speculative and that's at best. At worst, they're outrageous, they're ridiculous. And specifically, I just want to mention what the prices are selling for based on my last week's eBay video. The copper is at about $600, the gold is about $750, and the platinum is about $1,900. So that's all I've got for today. I didn't even get into his other parallels or other rookie cards. That might have to be a topic for another video. But let me know what you think. Let me know whether you think they're reasonably priced, unreasonably. What's the reason for this? I know there's a huge amount of hype circulating, and let me know whether you think it's good or bad for the hobby as well. I'm a bit torn on this question. I think it's great that footy cards are selling for large sums of money. It gives it some legitimacy, it gives it some hype. However, I don't like to see cards selling for those prices if people are going to get bitten down the road, because big losses lead to people leaving the hobby and getting very jaded against the hobby. And I don't think that's a good thing long term. So I'll see you guys next video, and cheers.